Ane, bidasage nadijna cause. Jesus Christ nidan nuswanawan minawa. Mukwo and dodam always. Waganuxing nidojaba. And I'll share my story, some of it with you. We integrated a small southeastern town. And as soon as I was able to start school, we were reminded that the community didn't care for us being there. They threw stones at my mother hanging clothes on the line, the kids did, and there was a lot of conflict trying to attend school and learn anything and still run through this combat zone. And they had older kids that had formed gangs that would chase me, trying to remind me I didn't belong there. But what they did was they awakened a curiosity in me as to where did I belong. And my great aunt Ella, Delita and I share that memory of her, those memories of her, would come down and visit us in the winter. And she often took me aside and she was educating me. I didn't realize it at the time that that's what she was doing. But I remember when I was about 10 years of age, she said, I want you to do something for me. And I said, what? And she said, I want you to carry my grandfather's name. And she said, but I want you to understand there's responsibilities that go with that. And it's going to be important that you live up to those responsibilities. Now this was happening, and you know, the level of importance that a 10-year-old can put on something like that's not very extensive. But she said, I want you to carry the name Petoskey. So then in my life, it became important for me to find out about Petoskey, my great-great-grandfather. And initially in my research, I became quite angry because the history that I discovered and the things that impacted his life and how he had survived. But then realizing too that even when I look at that statue that we were a part of unveiling, that there was a great deal of wisdom in him because he had been an acquaintance of Tecumseh. And he was involved in the War of 1812. And it was written in a book, it's called The Land of the Crooked Tree, that was written in the early 1800s by a man, I think his name was Charles White. But he said if all the accolades of Chief Petoskey had been written, they would have hung him. So somehow he was able to escape the legal possibilities and the attention of the federal government and to exist here in his homeland in a peaceable way, but yet maintain his cultural and traditional identity. And that was a lesson for me. Now, my father decided when we were young that he was no longer going to speak the language in the house. And when I asked him why, and he said, because it will not serve you in this world today. All it'll do is cause more problems. And so he stopped speaking the language. And over the years, even he lost it, a big share of it. So I wanted to start a recovery process, and one of the things that I challenged was I said, I have an inheritance that belongs to me that I want back. And I'm going to do what I can to try to get that back. And part of my journey, I'll share this with you, that we moved in my sophomore year to Lansing, Michigan, from a small farming community where I was trying to survive to a larger city community that was even a greater level of survival. And the third or fourth day in, I went down to my gym locker and got my tennis shoes on, and at 20 minutes of 8, I went out the back door of the school, and I went almost 38 miles to Stockbridge, Michigan, arriving there around 4:30 or 4:45, and begging my grandfather to let me live with him because he lived there alone. And of course, I didn't think about Grandpa being too old to take care of a teenage boy. And my dad come down and picked me up. And he told me, he said, if you do this again, he said, I'll put you in boys training school. I'd already been in foster care at 14 because of the conflicts with my dad and I. And survived that and made the decision that I would try to get through high school and get out of high school. And at first opportunity, I would get away. And maybe I've shared the story with you about having this dream about this woman that I'd spend my life with. And I saw her in the dream. And later I saw her walking down the street. And 2.5 months later, she was my wife. And she always criticized because I told all the boys in that little town, I said, if I catch you looking at her, you're going to be real sorry. By that time, I had grown up, see. I wasn't a victim anymore. And my wife and I will soon celebrate 52 years together. But I believe there's things that the Creator does in our life because it's the Creator's intention for us to survive and to process the things that in our lives and not be victim to circumstances, but to be in control of our lives and make our own decisions based on what we know. Through this process, after getting married, we moved to Keweenaw Bay. And we moved to Keweenaw Bay. I left a decent paying job for no job, living in the bush. And any of you that have been up around Keweenaw Bay, you can really understand what the bush is like. And for 2 years, I subsisted, hunted and fished to feed my family. And they were 2 of the greatest years of my life because, and realizing in this journey of gaining my inheritance back, and I was living those things that our people used to live. I was gathering off the land. I didn't take more than I needed. I respected the fact that I wasn't out there to kill something. I was out there to help my family survive, and I would give honor to that animal or that fish or whatever I took and put that same on down. Yeah, I'd learned that. And ended up getting a job with New Day Treatment Center where I was working as a counselor, later became the house manager, became the administrative assistant down here working in treatment. And they created a position for me at New Day called Spiritual Traditionalist Counselor. So I was trying to process that. And then through this whole process, in 1978, Congress returned our religious rights to us that we could worship our own way. We could have our sweat lodges and our pipe ceremonies, and we could meet out at Uncle Rollins and have our fires and gatherings. There was a time when it was illegal to do that. And learning all these things, I learned them in Keweenaw Bay. I'm Odawa and Lakota both. So there's maybe some confusion between being a rabbit choker and a buffalo hunter, I don't know. It's kind of like trying to be a Chevrolet and a Ford at the same time, you know. But Keweenaw Bay went a long ways to teaching me. But one of the things that I heard up there was that we needed to go out and learn everything that we can and bring those gifts back to our people to help our people survive. And we're doing that. Because I'm looking around the room here and there's educated people. I'm not educated, although I'm a published author. I've traveled the United States as a presenter because people would like to hear what I have to say. And I have a book here in the library if you haven't read it yet. It's called Dancing My Dream. And I was working here one time, and Joe Mitchell and I danced together a lot in the powwows, you know. Well, I want to get back to this 1978 when they returned our religious rights to us. I was working with Ted Odawa, Jim St. Arnold, and some others up there, Earl Miller, and we organized the first powwow. And I don't know, I wish you could have been there to see the celebration that it was, that finally we're free to do what we wanted to in our powwow. And to dance that first time, that grand entry, it was a powerful thing. And it just got more powerful as we went. And one of the people I met there was Jimmy Williams from Waters Meat. He's Lake Superior, Ojibwe from Waters Meat. And he became a teacher. And one of the things he taught me was that nothing is evil of itself as long as we learn what it's trying to teach us. In my young years, I tried to put Hiram Walker and Budweiser out of business. Budweiser and Hiram Walker was trying to teach me something, and I didn't get it for a while, but then finally I got it, you know, what they were trying to teach me. Because I wanted to live a good life. I wanted to represent my great-great-grandfather in a good way. And part of that responsibility was being conscious of our traditions and culture and allowing myself my own progress and my own discovery, and to become valid as a human being, because some of that was taken through the boarding schools and the reservations. Now they're asking me to come out in communities and do different things. But one of the other thing I want to share with you, that Joe Mitchell came back one time and we'd been praying together and we talked together about it. And he had written a name on a piece of birch bark or paper, I can't remember what, and he put it on my desk. And I said to him, I said, Joe, what does this mean? And the words were Nam Dam Nimwi. And he said, you're a dream dancer. So that was another name given to me, Dream Dancer. So my book is entitled Dancing My Dream, and I'll share with you how that came about. In 2005, we were unveiling the statue to my great-great-grandfather, and a man come up and tugged on my arm, and he said, I've read some articles that you've written. He said, I've liked some of the things that you said. And he said, if you'd be comfortable with sending me some more samples of it. He said, I'm a writer too. So I thought, well, can't hurt anything. 2 weeks later, he contacted me back and he said, I'm an editor, one of the editors of the Detroit Free Press. And I have a journalist here who work with you pro bono to get your book written. So I can't take credit for any of that stuff. This is the things that happened with me with my prayer, wanting my inheritance back and that consciousness of who we are. Delita's been a part of that because she's lived here. And my thing with orientation was being orientated here, studying the history. And most people don't know, I know Delita knows, maybe a few others, that my great-great-grandfather went to the federal government before Michigan became a state, and he and his sons purchased 440 acres. Represents the whole metropolitan downtown area of Petoskey. And when Michigan became a state, the federal government never bothered transferring the deed of ownership down to the state level. And it showed up on the tax rolls as being tax deficient. And the first guy that shows up with a deed to 80 acres was a Presbyterian minister. Who would have thought, you know? And my grandfather knew that if he had resisted, we'd already been threatened with removal to Kansas. That if he resisted, they were going to load us all up in boxcars and we would have ended up in Kansas. And so he had to find a way to do this walk and survive, and the people around him survive. Most people don't know that there was a band down in the Petoskey area that was called the Bear River Band of Odawa Indians. And there's a couple of books that mention the Bear River Band. So he was a part of that band, and the reason that he purchased those 440 acres was so that the people up in Waganukshing could come down to the head of the bay and live as much a life of subsistence as possible without any interference. And you'll find him as one of the signatories on the 1855 treaty. Eventually, out of all of this processing, I was asked to come, and our chairman, Frank Odawa, sent me to Arlington, Virginia, to be a part of this congressional listening session. And there were 100 tribes represented there, and it's when George Bush Jr. was first taking office. And out of the 12 tribes, they picked 12 speakers, and I happened to be one of them. I didn't plan it that way, and I hadn't had anything planned as far as what I was going to do. And most of the people got up and they were begging, please don't cut our health care funds, please don't cut our housing, our elder care, these kinds of things, educational. And when it came my turn to get up there, I happened to have in my briefcase a copy of the 1855 treaty. And I carried the paper up there. I felt led to do this. I'm not intelligent enough to think this stuff up ahead of time. And I carried it up there, and I said, I have a document here that's a copy of an agreement between my government and your government. And I said, in this document, I said, it specifies your obligations to us for the land we gave you. I said, we don't want to hear about budget cuts. You are indebted to us. And the moderator jumped up and he said, you need to understand we're so many $1 million, $1 trillion in debt. So I can't remember what it was. And I said, I can't help it if you're not fiscally responsible. If I don't make my car payments, they'll come and take my car. And I said, if you can't keep up your obligation, give us the land back. And I said, if that happens, I want the golf course at Harbor Springs. Well, I don't think the government officials thought that was all that funny. And when I went back out the foyer and sat down, I had made friends with this elder Navajo woman, and she came out and she said, Warren, you've got to watch your mouth. She said, somebody's going to shoot you. And they had announced a tour the next day to all the memorials, to the Native American Museum and to the Smithsonian. So next morning I got up, got dressed real quick and got some room coffee going and getting ready to go down and get on the tour bus. And the creator spoke to me and said, don't go. I said, okay. Switched out of my clothes and got my PJs back on and turned the news on, and I was sitting in there sipping coffee. And then I remember there's a Starbucks down in the foyer of the Crystal Gateway Hotel. I never seen a place like that. They even had a whole city underground underneath that. They had ribs down there and all kinds of stores. And I said, these people are a bunch of moles. They live underground, And I got me 2 big cups of Starbucks coffee, and I bought me a New York Times. Imagine that. I was trying to create an image, see. And I was sipping on my Starbucks coffee, and I had the New York Times up, every once in a while looking over the top, see if anybody's looking at me. And then trying to work the crossword puzzle. I actually was able to complete some of it, And the buses came back, and this same Navajo woman with a couple of the other elders came and sat down, and they said, Warren, we thought you were going on the tour. And I said, well, I had got up to go, and the creators told me don't go. She said, well, why would he say that to you? And I said, I wondered the same thing. I said, until I got down here and was sitting, and I said, the image of the front of the Smithsonian came up. And I remembered that there's 12,000 remains of our people still in boxes in the basement. And we've been challenging them to return those remains so we can take care of them in a good way. And a scripture came to me from their book. Outward, you're like whited sepulchres. Inward, you're full of dead men's bones. And the struggle that we have is trying to recover from the spiritual damage that was done to us through the boarding schools and the religions and all the politics in the world. Because when the Western civilization came here, the first thing that they had to do was kill our spiritual consciousness, because we were a part of life and all life-giving things. We didn't see ourselves as greater or lesser. We were a part of it. And when I went to the UP, that was a part of my discovery, was going out in places where I felt like few men walk, because I would walk sometimes 6 miles, 9 miles back into the bush. People were surprised I could find my way back out. They thought I'd get lost back there. They said most Chmukman did. I was back there for a different reason, though, and to be able to feel those things, that life around me, you hear the water and the stream. I wrote poetry about that. By the way, one of my poems is in the Maritime Museum at Petoskey. But the purpose for it all is not, and I know Delita shares this as well, I don't care if anybody ever remembers me. What I do care about is our survival and our children's survival. And I remember something F. Browning Pipestem said to me. He said, I reached back 7 generations and I have a hold of the hands of the ancestors. And he said, I reached forward 7 generations to the generation that's coming. He said, I'm making history today. All the great songs haven't been sung. All the great works haven't been done yet. And all the great words haven't been spoken. That's why we're all here, all of us. That's why we're here. And I know I've been a little bit lengthy. I want to share one old story with you that comes from generations ago. In Wagenuxing, most of the people went to the summer grounds down near Cahokia, near the Cahokia people in Illinois. And that's where we would spend our winters. But there was always a remnant that stayed in Wagenuxing. And on this particular day, it was in late fall, early winter, a light snow had come and blanketed everything. And in those days, it was said that a squirrel could go into a tree at Wagenuxing and never touch the ground all the way to Akiak. And that canopy was high, and the pathways through it were just like highways. Hard to imagine. And this grandfather had got up and he was going to play with his grandkids as he'd done every day. He was really excited because he loved his grandkids and he loved being with them. Because those grandkids are teachers. You listen to them, they'll teach you. And he got all of his morning chores done, his wood gathered and everything for the day. And then he was hurrying across the village and he picked up this old dead stick as he went. And when he got close to his daughter's wigwam, he was calling out, "Hey, hey!" And here's 2 boys come out of the wigwam, one about 12 and one about 14. Mishomas, what are we going to do today? Mishomas said, I have a brand new game for us. We're going to have a good time today. He said, let me take you and show you this new game because we're all going to participate. And he went over to this little clearing in the woods and he drew a line on the ground. And it stood out in the snow. And then he went down maybe about 10 yards and drew another line. And he came back and he said, now boys, he said, the object of this game is that we're going to step up to that line with 1 foot and then place 1 foot directly in front of the other and go all the way down to the other line. And the 12-year-old, like 12-year-olds do, said, Mishomas, I can do it. You know how they are. They can do anything. They're 10 foot tall and bulletproof, you know. And he stepped up to the line and he's trying to be very careful, 1 foot in front of the other, and he's really slow, taking his time all the way down to the other line. And he ran back and they looked down the line where his steps were in the snow, and there was 3 or 4 steps out of line. And Mishoma said, well, you did a real good job. I'm really proud of you. And the 14-year-old said, Mishomas, I know I can do it. And he stepped up there And he started in very carefully, one foot in front of the other, very carefully to go all the way down to the other line, and ran back, and they looked, and here was 2 or 3 steps out of line. They said, well, that was even better job, good job, but that's because of your age. He said, let me try it. So Mishoma stepped up there, and he put 1 foot down in front of the other, all the way down to the other line. And when they come back, they looked down there, and there wasn't 1 step out of line. And they said, Mishomas, how come you could do that and we couldn't? He said, boys, what were you looking at? And they said, well, we were looking at the next place to put our foot. They said, Mishomas, what were you looking at? And he said, I was looking at that tree on the other side of the clearing. And so I'll share with you today how important the elders are in this day that we're living in, especially with all the confusion in the world today. Because as Native people and as human beings, not just indigenous people, as human beings, we have got to find our way through this morass of confusion and chaos in the world. And we can. But we have to give ourselves to that higher power who owns everything, sees everything, knows everything, and you have a specific place to occupy and work from in this world. So I'll share the same thing that Delita did, that I'm honored and feel grateful that you would have any interest in what I say. And I'm glad to be here. Miigwech.